New Orleans Saints wide receiver Michael Thomas will undergo surgery for his toe injury and has been added to injured reserve. What it means for his future here in 2022, the players around him, and why you should be buying in on Chris Olave right now if you haven't been crazy enough to do so just yet. We got all of that and a little bit of land yet for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into a live episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always. Make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday here on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at BetOnline. They've got more odds, lines, and props than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So today, on this live episode, I decided to go live. Thanks everybody for being here for a live episode. Carla, Nola Gang, Chris Sanders, Jay, I see you, Mr. Jerry. I appreciate everybody and more for being up here for the live show. And if you're catching it later, thank you so much for watching and listening as well. It's a tough day today. Tough news for the New Orleans Saints. We were at the New Orleans Saints training facility. I was preparing to bring good news to New Orleans Saints fans about Jarvis Landry being back at practice, PJ Williams being back at practice, all of that. But then we get on the conference call with Dennis Allen and we learn that Michael Thomas is not only not getting back to practice anytime soon, he's also going on injured reserve, getting surgery, and could potentially miss the rest of the season. So we're going to break that down. I'll give you all the details that you need to know, how this happened, why it happened, and what the New Orleans Saints need to do moving forward. Then we'll also take a look at which players you should be buying into because of Michael Thomas being out, who ends up elevating within the New Orleans Saints offense for the rest of the season. And then we'll wrap up by taking a look at the other injuries around the New Orleans Saints, Baltimore Ravens, and how they can potentially impact Monday night's matchup. So here's the big news, right? Michael Thomas is headed to injured reserve and his season might be over, which means it's time for you, if you're crazy and you haven't done it already, to buy into Chris Olave, buy into Alvin Kamara, buy into Taysom Hill, because those are the weapons that Pete Carmichael is going to be leaning on for the rest of the season. There's good news there. There's bad news there. Let's break it down. So here's what happened with Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas had a toe injury that took place week 3 up against the Carolina Panthers. Some people speculated that it was turf toe. There was no official designation that it was ever turf toe or anything. It was only speculation. Although we asked several times for details on what the injury was. If it was a turf toe injury, we weren't given much information on all of it. And that's not unusual for an NFL team to not give injury information, because then you end up in a John Harbaugh, Brashad Perriman situation where you say, he just fell on his knee, he'll be fine. And then all of a sudden they miss the rest of the season and it doesn't look great. So when stuff like that happens, it's not surprising. So he had the toe injury. The Saints basically had an option. Put him through surgery, potentially lose him for the rest of the season right away, or try to rehab and avoid surgery and then go to surgery as a last case, sort of last ditch effort. So the Saints, I think, made the best decision that they could from their outlook. Maybe not the decision that I would make, but the best decision that they probably could have made from their outlook was keep the door open to get Michael Thomas back this season. That's what they tried to do. They tried to rehab the toe injury. This was not a misdiagnosis. This was not anyone saying that it was something else when it wasn't, or anything like that. This was the team making the decision to try to avoid surgery, and unfortunately couldn't avoid surgery. As Dennis Allen explained it to us today, they tried to rehab. The rehabilitation didn't take for the toe, and now he has to go through surgery. And so because of that, he's going to be headed to injured reserve. We asked, does that mean that his season is over? Dennis Allen told us very clearly that he does not anticipate Michael Thomas getting back to the field this season. Now, that could mean that that could mean that it could come back in the postseason if the Saints extend their season at all. But there's no reason to start to hope for that. I think at this point you just say, okay, the Saints will need to readdress this in the offseason and figure out what the future is with Michael Thomas. So what is the future with Michael Thomas? Well, if they decided to move on from him post-June 1, they could save up to $16 million in their salary cap, and they'll take on about $11 million in dead cap. That's not as bad as if they were to move on from him, or as a lot of people wanted them to do, try to trade him during the trade deadline, which we would have taken on $25 million of dead cap, which would have done them absolutely no favors at that point. So with that being the situation, the Saints can reevaluate this in the offseason and figure out what it is, what it means for the future of Michael Thomas and the New Orleans Saints. I wouldn't blame them for going either way. Try to get him back out on the field for week 1 because you're paying the salary one way or another, or try to move on from him post June 1 and then see if you can open up some of that salary cap space and spend it somewhere else. You're not going to have somebody that's going to come out and replace Michael Thomas 1-for-1, but you haven't had Michael Thomas 1 at all so far. 10 appearances over the last 41 games for which he could have been eligible. So at that point, you say as a team, what's really the loss at this point, because you haven't been able to get him out on the field anyway. Now, it sucks for Michael Thomas, and I'm probably not supposed to say it this way or whatever, but it does. It sucks for Michael Thomas. Like, I know for a fact that Michael Thomas was working to get back out on the field and doing everything that he could to get back out there, and he played through the ankle injury that he suffered week 1 in 2020 and played through it a ton and made it worse and, shut himself down for the end of the season so he could be there to try to get into the postseason and win Drew Brees another ring on his way out, all of those things. But unfortunately, that's not the side of this that's going to be looked at. Like, Michael Thomas's legacy that he's going to leave behind at this point is going to be, unless things drastically change within the next couple of years, as he's 30 years old, unfortunately, his legacy is going to turn into him being a player that is injury prone and him being a player that never really got to realize his potential because he was derailed by injuries. And that stinks because he's a record-breaking wide receiver that earned a big contract with 3 big seasons, capitalized on that big contract, went out and delivered a record-breaking performance after he got that contract. And now all that anyone's going to remember about him is that he's injured. But such is the way that it goes when it comes to, like I said, trading him was not an option. Post June 1 is really the time to look at if the New Orleans Saints are going to look to do anything in terms of, what they can do for him in terms of the future. All I know is that Odell Beckham Jr. better be getting a phone call at some point over the course of the next couple of weeks. And you're hoping, of course, that Jarvis Landry can get back here very soon, which there's good news from that. So we'll get to that here in just a sec. But next, Chris Olave, if you haven't bought in on him before, and you have every reason to, but if you haven't, now's the time to do it. And right now, you want to know where are the New Orleans Saints going to go for the rest of the season when it comes to wide receiver production without Michael Thomas. So that's what we're going to look at next. We're going to break all of that down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But before we get to that, thank you very much for joining us here for this live episode. I want to tell you about our friends over at Prediction Strike. Prediction Strike is really cool because it's not a gambling site. It's not fantasy. If you're somebody that likes stocks and trading and all those other things and investments, then this is for you, right? But instead of you having to invest in some company that you've never heard of that might be up in the stock market for right now and all this, you're investing in what you know, which is sports. You're literally investing in players. It's the first ever sports stock market. And one of my favorite things about this is that actually a percentage of all of the funds that are created here goes back to the athletes. So unlike all of those sports betting companies, unlike all of the fantasy companies where none of the money goes back to the athletes, this actually ends up going back to the athletes for their name, image, likeness, all of that stuff. So it's really cool. And you can invest in 4 sports, not just the NFL, UFC, NBA, and MLB. So let's say that you end up grabbing somebody like a Kyle Pitts who's down right now. You grab him in a year or later on in the season, he has a big game. You could sell that and you can make a profit off of it and get him when he's like up 40% or something like that. So really, really cool stuff for you to check out over at Prediction Strike. So download the Prediction Strike app today. Oh, best news about this too is that this isn't gambling, which means that it's available everywhere. There's no restrictions on it or anything like that in terms of like availability. So wherever you are, you can use this. So Prediction app. Prediction Strike app. Just use the promo code LOCKED, LOCKED, and you'll get a free share when you sign up, when you make your first deposit of $20 or more. So you got to make the deposit first, and then you get a free share. That's a promo code LOCKED, LOCKED, for a special one-time giveaway as well. Prediction Strike is going to choose one person who signs up with that promo code and makes a deposit, and then you could win up to 100 free random shares. So that could mean that you could win up to $3,000 if you luck out and receive like a Josh Allen share or something like that. So invest in what you know, the sport you love, over at Prediction Strike, the stock market for sports. Pretty cool stuff there. But does it get any cooler than Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market, the number one protein bar that I've ever tried, the number one protein bar that you'll ever try as well. It's absolutely awesome. You can check them out over at built.com. Great flavors. If you like things that sound super sugary sweet, like let's say a salted caramel or a cookies and cream or something like that, you're going to find it, but you're going to get like 4 or 5 grams of sugar. That's it, while you're getting 15, 16, 17 grams of protein and just around 150 calories. Like, these protein bars are awesome. You're getting all the protein, the stuff that's good for you, but you're not getting all the sugar. You're not going to deal with the crash later on in the day. You could eat these pre-workout, post-workout, middle of the day, everything. So make sure you go and check them out today. It's over at built.com is the place that you're going to want to go. And I'm going to help you get 15% off by using the promo code LOCKEDON15, LOCKEDON15. Use the numerals. That's 15% off with your order right now using the promo code LOCKED15 at built.com. All right, everybody, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. What are the New Orleans Saints going to do now in terms of producing on offense when they know that they're not going to get Michael Thomas back? How much does this really impact the New Orleans Saints? And I'm going to tell you just straight up, surprisingly, not very much in terms of what we've seen so far. I'll explain in just a sec. First, I want to tell you about the Locked On Sports Today podcast, everything you need to know around the world of sports in around 20 to 25 minutes, somewhere around there, with the local experts bringing you the local insight the way that only the Locked On Podcast Network can provide. It's available on this app, Odyssey, YouTube, wherever it is that you get your podcast. Okay, so what do I mean that this doesn't have as big an impact on the New Orleans Saints right now? So what I mean when I say that is that for the past 5 games, the New Orleans Saints haven't had Michael Thomas. And during that time, they put up top 5 in terms of major statistical categories on the offensive side, including great production, top 10 production in their passing offense. Going into the game against the Las Vegas Raiders, they were, top 5 in the NFL in terms of total offense, top 8 in both categories of passing yardage and rushing yardage. So that's the thing that's really, really interesting to me, is that, this stinks because you wanted to see kind of if the Saints could go to the next level when it came to their offense. But right now, in terms of total yards, they're 5th overall when it comes to that category. When it comes to even the more nuanced, analytical, more in-depth statistics, 7th in the NFL in net yards per attempt. So it takes into account interceptions. It takes into account yardage lost in sacks, things like that. And the Saints are still top 10 in that. And that's a strictly passing category, right? And then you look at their run game, of course, they're 8th in terms of rushing yards, 8th in terms of scoring on the ground, and 7th in terms of yards per attempt, averaging 5 yards per carry on the ground. So I say all of that to say this. And I like the way that Andy Dalton put it. It would be one thing if the New Orleans Saints, in their current iteration of their offense, which didn't really begin until the London game, it would be different if that was including Michael Thomas, and then now they're just now losing Michael Thomas. The fact of the matter is that the current iteration of the New Orleans Saints offense that has been in existence over the course of the past 5 games has been without Michael Thomas to begin with, and they put up very, very good numbers. They have continued to put up these things that we're talking about. So what I'm not trying to say here is that Michael Thomas doesn't mean anything to the New Orleans Saints offense. Clearly that's true, and he helps you take everything to another level. But The New Orleans Saints, in their current iteration of what their offense is right now, with Andy Dalton as their starting quarterback, with Alvin Kamara running like crazy right now, averaging 93.5 receiving yards per game, who scored 3 touchdowns last week. Chris Olave, who's been absolutely outstanding. Taysom Hill, who has been somebody that they've continued to be able to lean on throughout games, whether it be for a drive or whether it be for the entire length of a game, like we saw against Seattle. Those things are very much still within their wheelhouse, even though Michael Thomas isn't back on the field. So where do the New Orleans Saints look to continue to produce without Michael Thomas getting back? You look back at the exact same players. If you haven't bought in on Chris Olave, first of all, what are you doing? Secondly, you might as well now, because he's the passing offense. Effectively, you've got a great run offense in terms of your 1-2 punch in Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill. I expect that Jordan Howard will very likely be the guy that gets elevated to be RB2 this coming week. You'll see what you get from him. But even if you don't get anything great from Jordan Howard, you still got Alvin Kamara, you still got Taysom Hill, you still got Chris Olave, you've got Juwan Johnson, who continues to get better and better every week, and Adam Troutman is continuing to return to practice and everything, so that makes your run game even better. You just got Andrews Pete, which bolsters your run game as well. The Saints don't have to change the identity that they have found and that works because of the fact that Michael Thomas is unlikely to be available for the rest of the season. That's my point. They have found a way already to succeed without Michael Thomas, so not getting him back for the rest of the season doesn't mean that they lose anything. It's not a net negative. You don't get the net positive of getting him back 100%. That is true, but you don't end up in a net negative when it comes to what you're doing there. The other thing is that you're hoping to get Jarvis Landry back. Jarvis Landry was back at practice this week. He was there for stretch. He was there for a little bit of individual drills, but as we started to leave, he went back to the locker room. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly what his progress is going into this matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. Remember, up against Seattle, he was limited on Wednesday, limited on Thursday, but then downgraded to DNP, did not participate. On Friday, did not play that week and has not been back ever since. That's where we assume that the setback with his foot injury happened. So we'll wait and see what the injury report looks like tomorrow. We'll wait and see what practice participation looks like tomorrow. And remember, the Saints will also practice on Saturday. Saturday will be their Friday. So the big piece that you're looking at there is, can you get Jarvis Landry back out on the field? Because he just gives you another sort of possession receiver, and I think a very good complement to who Chris Olave is as well over on the other side, because he can be a possession receiver that can do a little bit of everything else, just like Chris Olave is a vertical receiver who can do everything else, right? So I think that those two things complement each other very well. But you're also looking for Rashid Shaheed to continue to develop. You're looking for Marquez Callaway to continue to make, big plays on the, which is like the 3-yard slants on a 2nd and 3 when you're trying to put the game away. Like, you still need those things from the New Orleans Saints. I agree that right now, like, the New Orleans Saints should be checking in on Odell Beckham Jr., checking in with his representation to see when he's going to be available and when he sounds like he's going to be able to get back out on the field. Because having a rotation, because remember, the Saints don't really have a situation to where, like, there's a primary this, primary that. They move everyone around. So having a rotation of Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, Chris Olave, and Rashid Shaheed would be pretty great for this team. But even if they don't get that, even if they don't get Odell Beckham Jr., you still get a little bit of a net positive with Jarvis Landry, hopefully getting back to the lineup here soon. So that's the way that I look at it for the New Orleans Saints. They're not starved now without Michael Thomas, because they've already kind of know what life without Michael Thomas is, because this current version of the Saints offense never had him in the first place. Now, there's not just bad news when it comes to injuries. Like I mentioned, there's some good news for the New Orleans Saints. There's some bad news for the Baltimore Ravens. So let's break down the injury report, and I'll tell you a little bit about what it is that could potentially impact this Monday night matchup between the New Orleans Saints and the Baltimore Ravens. We'll have that coming up for you as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. But first, I'm going to tell you about our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. Now, the New Orleans Saints could be using LinkedIn Jobs right now if they were in need of a wide receiver, but thankfully they're not super desperate at wide receiver. It's not the situation that they were in 2021, but maybe you're in a situation to where you're looking to hire for your job because you just found out you had to put somebody on IR and they're done for a little while, which is a nice way of saying, hey, you got a job opening, right? So for you can head over to LinkedIn Jobs to post your job and be able to find all of the quality candidates that you need and with expedition. They get it done very quickly. It's why small businesses have rated LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality candidates versus all their leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the quality candidates that you want to talk to much faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. We are wrapping up this episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day here on the show. Very much appreciate you being here. And to those of you that are here for the live episode, thank you very much as well, as we continue on here live for today's Locked On Saints. So not a lot of great news for the New Orleans Saints today based upon Michael Thomas, who is, as Dennis Allen said, he anticipates that Michael Thomas will not return for the rest of this season. You wonder maybe what happened in the couple of days between him saying that he believed he'd be back this season and then now hearing that he won't be back this season. And I'll tell you, it's as simple as a phone call. That's all that it takes. One phone call that says, hey, DA, this isn't working. We're going to have to go with surgery. And bam, everything changes. That's how quickly things move in the NFL, unfortunately. So what about the good news for the New Orleans Saints? Well, let me tell you a little bit. They got Jarvis Landry back today. We'll have to wait and see what it looks like throughout the rest of the week. But even just if they can get him back out on the field this weekend, that would be a big deal for them. Again, if he can't, then again, it's not a net negative because you haven't had him in this version of the offense anyway. But it looks like you're going to potentially get Adam Troutman back this weekend, and you could potentially also get PJ Williams back over on the defensive side as well. And I know that some people might scoff at the name PJ Williams, but honestly, when you think about what's coming to town here, you do need somebody that tackles well. And PJ Williams does tackle well from the nickel position. He's kind of struggled further away from the line of scrimmage, things like that in terms of making tackles. But he's been outstanding as a safety. He revitalized his career first as a slot corner, though. So I think that when you look at where Chris Harris excelled last week, he played every single snap in the slot. He was actually a pretty good tackler throughout that time, too. He allowed 3 catches, made tackles basically at the catch point each time. So the good news, as Sean is asking here in the chat, is that you can still be getting some players back this week, which would certainly help to get all of that. So you get a potential, complementary piece in your passing game in in Jarvis Landry back, hopefully, fingers crossed, this week. You get the potential here of having Adam Troutman back, who hasn't been the most reliable in the passing game, or not reliable, the most effective in the passing game so far, although his first couple of games with Andy Dalton, he kind of progressed there, but he has also helped big time in the run game. So to J-Ro's point here, the defense wins you games. On the offensive side, one of the cliches that I love is, what's up, bro? One of the cliches that I love is you pass to score points, but you run to win the game. And so if you're still continuing to build a passing attack, if you build a passing attack around the Alvin Kamara, the attack of Alvin Kamara, Taysom Hill, let's just say you build your run game around that. You've got Andrews Pete back. He bolsters your run game. And if you can get Adam Troutman back, he bolsters your run game as well, although J.P. Holtz has been outstanding so far there. But over on the defensive side, you're still looking to get healthier. And LGO, this will answer your question here at least a little bit. Surprise, surprise. There's no timeline on when Marshawn Lattimore is expected to return, but you have to imagine he's still a couple of weeks out. He's not participating today, so you doubt that you're going to see him by the end of the week or on Monday. So you're looking probably for something to happen maybe in a couple of weeks here when it comes to Marshawn Lattimore. But on the defensive side, you still have to be able to produce. So this is where some of the things that are happening with the Baltimore Ravens are key. Rashad Bateman this week. Rashad Bateman also got bad news. The Baltimore Ravens, that their top wide receiver, Rashad Bateman, he will also be out for the rest of the season. So you're not going to see Bateman out on the field. Mark Andrews did not participate in today's practice. Tomorrow's practice will be key there. If Mark Andrews doesn't participate next week, on Friday or on Saturday, then very likely not playing on Sunday, but we'll see, on Monday, but we'll see how that goes. The next piece is, you've got players over for the Baltimore Ravens that were not out at practice today, like Mark Andrews, like Gus Edwards, like Ronnie Staley, who was probably more so getting some rest. And then don't trip when you see names like, Calais Campbell and Justin Houston not practicing. Those are very likely a rest as well. So for me, you're not going to see some key players potentially for the Baltimore Ravens. So something to keep an eye out on. Tito Man asking about Marcus Williams. Marcus Williams is out for the season, so he will not play against the New Orleans Saints. So the way that I look at it is the New Orleans Saints lost something that they could have potentially gained down the road, but they haven't lost anything in terms of what's been working for them so far this season. So that's the key piece here. And you can potentially add Jarvis Landry to this equation. Fingers crossed. Hopefully we see that soon. But yeah, Marcus Williams will not play. I also had another question that I wanted to make sure that I addressed, because on Monday we're going to break down a little bit more about the Baltimore Ravens game and put some final thoughts to that, which will be around how to stop Lamar Jackson. And one of the interesting things that the New Orleans Saints did this week is that they brought in Brett Hundley, the former Green Bay Packers quarterback, former UCLA quarterback. He was drafted in the 4th round of the 2016 draft, maybe 3rd round, mid-round of the 2016 draft. They brought him in, and basically the idea is to have him run the scout team and act as Lamar Jackson, effectively. So there's 2 reasons why this was a good choice by the New Orleans Saints. A, he's a pretty fast guy, but then B, he spent the preseason with the Baltimore Ravens. So he has an understanding of their playbook. He has an understanding of exactly what it is that they like to do in their system, all of that. So it's a really interesting move for the New Orleans Saints to bring in a guy like Brett Hundley and say, okay, you're running the practice squad for this week, and you're going to run the scout team for this week, which is and when I say scout team, what that means is that he basically runs the practice team that the starting defense goes up against, right? So they'll have him kind of be the Lamar Jackson in that case. So really, smooth thinking by the New Orleans Saints to go out there and try to get some trade secrets up out of Brett Hundley, and a former Baltimore Raven that was a brief teammate of Lamar Jackson's this preseason. Okay. Coming up on Monday, unless we get big news with Friday's practice and injury report, then I'll go live again on Friday. But otherwise, Monday's show is all going to be about answering the question, how can the New Orleans Saints limit Lamar Jackson? There's 3 different ways that they can go about it. We'll break down each of the 3 different ways. We'll talk about what's worked where, what hasn't worked since, and what I think the New Orleans Saints are going to do. So we're going to get to all that here as we continue on throughout the kind of weird week here on the show because of the Monday night game. So we'll have that for you next week. Any big news, anything else that happens in tomorrow's practice or Saturday's practice, trust will be here for you here on the Locked On Saints podcast, like we are every single Monday through Friday and then some. Appreciate you, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to also go and check out Locked On Sports Today. You want to hear more about that Locked On Pelicans or that New Orleans Pelicans loss? Locked On Pelicans is absolutely the place for you to be with Jake Madison. And if you're excited for the LSU-Alabama game this weekend, Caroline Fenton's got you taken care of over at Locked On LSU as well. I appreciate y'all, as always, for making me a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and this show. And of course, as always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.